God bless Jerusalem, the eternal, undivided capital of Israel. The Khamenei regime launched hundreds of ballistic missiles at my country, Israel. I wonder, did he tell you how much that attack cost?
It was just another evening in Jerusalem, the city where history's whispers can be heard in every stone, and every shadow seems to carry the weight of prophecy. That night, Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, sat in his official residence, going through national security reports. His mind was consumed by the endless demands of his role. Outside, the holy city sparkled under a sky full of stars, peaceful but ever alert, a divine encounter. But that night wasn't going to be like any other. As Netanyahu sifted through paperwork, something unusual began to stir within him. It wasn't exactly tiredness. It was something deeper, more like an inner pull, an instinctive urge to step back from the chaos around him. He didn't fight it. Instead, he listened, almost like the pull was guiding him towards stillness and prayer. The familiar words of Scripture came to mind. He who keeps Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. It was a verse that had always comforted him, grounding him in moments of uncertainty. So, he closed his eyes, seeking some clarity. What happened next was beyond anything he could have expected. The world around him seemed to disappear, replaced by an impossibly bright light. It was intense but oddly calming, surrounding him completely. As the light softened, everything around him changed. He was no longer sitting at his desk, in his office, or even in Jerusalem. Suddenly, Netanyahu found himself standing in the middle of an endless valley. It was vast and barren, stretching out in every direction, but strangely quiet. The air felt different, charged with something unexplainable, like there was energy in the atmosphere that he couldn't quite name. It wasn't the kind of quiet you'd expect in a desert. It was as though the whole place was waiting for something, and he was somehow part of that waiting. Then, in the distance, a figure appeared. It wasn't like anything he'd seen before. The figure glowed with a light that didn't seem to come from any source he recognized. It didn't move, but there was an undeniable presence to it, like it was standing there, waiting, with purpose. The air around the figure seemed to hum with significance, and Netanyahu couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to happen. He felt small, but at the same time, connected to something much bigger than himself. Out of the silence, a voice broke through. It was powerful, rich, and filled with authority. The kind of voice that commands attention and resonates deep within you. Netanyahu's heart skipped a beat as the voice spoke his name, Benjamin. The words echoed through the valley, and in that moment, everything shifted. This wasn't just a vision, not some fleeting moment of strange imagery. It was something real, something that was meant to change everything. The voice spoke again, and this time the words were clear, impossible to ignore. I am the one who has guarded this land since the beginning of time. You are the leader of Israel, but your role is greater than governing. You are called to be a witness to the signs of the times, a herald for my people. Netanyahu's heart raced as the weight of the words settled on him. He recognized the voice immediately. It was divine, something far beyond human. It filled him with awe and a sense of responsibility that was impossible to deny. This moment was a turning point, one that would reshape his understanding of the world, the future, and the role he was meant to play in it. There was no going back. The figure's voice came again, commanding Netanyahu's attention. Look at what is before you. Confused, Netanyahu turned, and what he saw nearly took his breath away. It was a terrifying vision. Nations were coming together, gathering their armies, and chaos was spreading like a dark storm cloud across the earth. The once peaceful world was now teetering on the edge of conflict. What struck him most were the alliances that seemed impossible. Nations that had never worked together before, now standing against Israel. The weight of it all settled in as he realized what he was seeing. This is what is coming, the figure continued. The time of the prophecies is being fulfilled. The battle of Armageddon is approaching. The words struck Netanyahu with the force of a thunderclap. He could hardly comprehend it as the vision unfolded. The figure spoke again, quoting from the book of Revelation. And they gathered them together into the place called in Hebrew Armageddon. The vision was undeniable. A time of reckoning was coming, and Israel would be at the center of it all. But then the figure's tone shifted. "Do not fear, for I am the Lord, and my word stands firm. Those who trust in me will be protected." Even as the vision showed him the darkness of the coming storm, something else began to emerge. Something bright, powerful, and filled with hope. In the sky above, an even brighter light appeared, and with it, a host of angels, filling the heavens with their radiance. At the center of it all stood a figure clothed in glory, resplendent in a way that made everything else seem insignificant. Netanyahu recognized him immediately. It was the Messiah. The Messiah spoke, and his words echoed with certainty. "I will return, and my foot will tread on this mountain, as I promised." On the Mount of Olives, overlooking Jerusalem to the east, Netanyahu found himself overwhelmed by the gravity of what he had just witnessed. A call to prepare. He dropped to his knees in reverence, the words of Zechariah 14:4 echoing in his mind. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. It was clear now, he wasn't just Israel's political leader. He was being called to prepare his people for something far greater than politics, something divine. The fulfillment of God's plan was unfolding before him, and he had a role to play in it. As the vision faded, Netanyahu was suddenly back in his office, but he was a changed man. The weight of what he had experienced lingered, and it wasn't something he could ignore. The sense of divine purpose had settled into his soul, and he knew he needed to act on it. The next morning, he called for a special meeting with his spiritual advisors and Israel's religious leaders. He had to share what had happened, even though he wasn't sure how it would be received. When he spoke, his voice was filled with emotion, the weight of the experience still pressing on him. "I'm not here just as a political leader," he said. "I'm here as a servant of Israel and a witness to what is to come." Some of those in the room listened with skepticism, others with fear, but all of them felt the gravity in his words. Netanyahu continued, "We need to turn to God. The times ahead are going to be incredibly challenging, but the Lord has promised us something." He paused for a moment, looking each person in the room in the eye. "Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved." From that day forward, Netanyahu wasn't just leading Israel through political crises. He felt a profound responsibility to guide the nation spiritually as well. After his powerful vision, Netanyahu knew he couldn't go back to just being a political leader. The experience had changed him in ways he couldn't fully explain. From that point on, he devoted himself not only to his political duties, but also to a deeper spiritual calling for Israel. He believed his role was now to prepare the nation, not just for the struggles of daily politics, but for the fulfillment of prophecy. He felt a deep responsibility to lead with faith, to guide his people through the coming storm with courage and trust in God's plan. He understood the challenges would be immense. The world around Israel was shifting, and tensions between nations were reaching dangerous heights. Netanyahu could feel the weight of it all. Israel wasn't just a country in the middle of a geopolitical conflict. He believed it was at the center of something far more significant, a prophetic moment that had been building for centuries. The world was on the brink of something, and Israel would play a pivotal role in it. A vision of prophecy. One night, as Netanyahu sat in his office, deep in silent meditation, something extraordinary happened. A divine presence suddenly filled the room. So profound and overwhelming, it felt as though the Lord himself was standing right next to him, speaking directly to his soul. The feeling was so intense, he could hardly breathe. He sat there, still, as a vision overtook him. The heavens opened up before him, and a thunderous voice broke the silence, calling his name and declaring that the time was near. The voice spoke of the coming war, a war that would be unlike anything Israel had ever faced. All the nations would rise against Israel, just as had been foretold in the scriptures. The voice spoke of a time when, after 1,000 years, Satan would be released from his prison and would deceive the nations of the earth, bringing them together in battle. The prophecy of Gog and Magog, the ultimate conflict, was drawing closer. Netanyahu felt the weight of these words sink deep into his heart. He had always known that Israel was at the center of something great, but now he was being told that the world's final battle was on the horizon. He knew that the path ahead would be difficult, but he also knew that his people had been chosen for this moment. Netanyahu knew this wasn't just a dream. What he had experienced was God revealing the fate of Israel in a way that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. A deep sense of responsibility settled over him, heavier than anything he had ever felt before. The weight of his role as a leader had always been significant, but now, after what he had witnessed, it felt even more profound. His mind was still reeling when he heard the Lord speak of something called Wilson's Ark. At first, the meaning of this was unclear, but Netanyahu could sense that it wasn't just a random phrase. It had to be connected to something bigger, something tied to the prophecy that was on the verge of being fulfilled. Over the following days, Netanyahu spent hours in prayer, seeking understanding. As he reflected on the vision, pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. Wilson's Ark wasn't just a symbol from the past. It was deeply tied to Israel's future, a key to unlocking the prophetic path ahead. It was both a reminder of Israel's history and a sign of the destiny that lay ahead. The more he prayed, the clearer it became that this ark represented both trials and triumphs to come, a turning point in Israel's journey. He remembered an old prophecy that had spoken of this ark as a harbinger of something momentous, something that would test the people of Israel in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Then, as if on cue, the attack came, the night of reckoning. In the dead of night, when the world was still, the shrill sound of air raid sirens broke the silence. The warning was stark. Iran had launched 300 missiles aimed directly at Israel. For a split second, Netanyahu was frozen. He could hardly process what was happening. The scale of the attack was staggering, something far beyond any previous assault Israel had ever faced. The Iron Dome, Israel's defense system, sprang into action. But there were so many missiles, it seemed like it might not be enough. The sheer number threatened to overwhelm the system, and Netanyahu felt a cold, unsettling fear grip him as the reality of the situation set in. In the crisis room, the urgency was palpable. This was no longer just about military strategy. It was a moment that could decide the fate of the nation. Netanyahu sat in the crisis room, glued to the screens, showing the attack unfold. Missiles streaked across the sky in real time, and his mind raced with the possibility that this might be the beginning of the battle he had seen in his vision. Was this the moment the prophecies had foretold? The moment when all the nations would rise against Israel? As the explosions lit up the sky and the sound of air raid sirens filled the room, he remembered the promises from God he had held onto since that fateful night. He had to trust in those words more than ever and let them guide him through the chaos. As he watched the assault, Netanyahu could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. But he found strength in the words that had carried him before. He knew that Israel wasn't just facing a physical battle. This was something much bigger. It was spiritual warfare. They were fighting against forces that couldn't be seen, a struggle between light and darkness that had been written long ago. In the midst of the terror, Netanyahu remained focused, knowing that this fight was not just about military strategy. It was about faith, conviction, and standing firm against the forces of evil. With urgency in his voice, Netanyahu called together his military and spiritual advisors. His words were filled with both the seriousness of the situation and a deep sense of resolve. They needed to act with faith and strength, knowing this wasn't just a typical war. This was a battle for Israel's very soul. As the world seemed to fall apart around him, Netanyahu felt a surge of purpose, knowing his people had a role to play in something far greater than the immediate conflict. Then, something extraordinary happened. Amid the explosions and the overwhelming threat of destruction, Netanyahu witnessed what could only be described as divine intervention. Many of the incoming missiles were intercepted by the Iron Dome. But some didn't just get intercepted, they seemed to veer off course entirely. It was as if an invisible hand was guiding them away from their targets. As the chaos subsided and calm began to return to Israel, Netanyahu knew he couldn't stay silent. The nation needed to hear from him to understand the magnitude of what had just occurred and what it signified. Addressing the people in a live broadcast, his voice carried both determination and emotion. Every word seemed to carry the weight of the moment, infused with the urgency of someone who had seen beyond the surface of events. Netanyahu began by speaking directly to the people of Israel, acknowledging the challenging times they were living through. He framed the recent events within the context of prophecy, explaining that what had unfolded was not just a random attack but part of a larger narrative. He emphasized that while the nations of the world seemed to be aligning against them, they had a reason to stand firm. This was not a moment for fear, but for faith. He assured them that there was a plan at work, one that transcended the immediate threats and held the promise of protection and deliverance. He brought up Wilson's Arch, a name that now carried profound significance. No longer just a historical artifact, it had become a symbol of Israel's connection to its divine destiny. Netanyahu described it as more than a bridge between the past and the future. It was a tangible reminder of God's plans for the nation. In his words, it represented the enduring strength of Israel and its unshakable role in what was yet to come. Netanyahu's address was not just about reassurance, it was a call to resilience and unity. He spoke with conviction, making it clear that this battle was not the end, but the beginning of something far greater. A divine awakening. The purpose for Israel remained steadfast, unshaken by the recent turmoil. Around the world, reactions to the missile strike came quickly. Some nations were quick to condemn Iran's actions, while others stayed silent, their inaction speaking louder than any words. Netanyahu, however, saw the attack for what it truly was, the beginning of something much larger. This wasn't just a physical battle, it was a spiritual war unfolding, a clash in realms beyond what could be seen. As the leader of Israel, Netanyahu sought guidance from above, knowing the challenges ahead would test everyone's resolve. To him, the missile strike wasn't merely an act of aggression. It was a wake-up call, a sign that events long foretold were now coming to pass. Everything seemed to align, the words he had heard in his vision, the miraculous protection Israel had witnessed, and the mysterious significance of Wilson's Arch. Together, they painted a clear picture. Prophecy was coming alive right before their eyes. Late one evening, back in his Jerusalem office, Netanyahu found himself reflecting on the gravity of it all. The city around him was quiet, but he could feel its ancient pulse, a steady rhythm echoing through its streets and stones. This wasn't just any city, it was a place charged with history and divine promises made long ago. Sitting there, surrounded by the weight of his responsibilities, he couldn't help but feel a deep connection to something far greater than himself. Despite the immense pressure, Netanyahu found a strange sense of peace. He knew his role wasn't just about politics or defense strategies. Netanyahu felt the presence again, a calming yet overwhelming force that wrapped around him, silencing his doubts and fears. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but its stillness carried a power that filled the room. Then, like a whisper to his soul, he felt a message. It wasn't long or complicated, but its meaning was profound. The time was near, and though the nations would rise against Israel, the divine plan for his people would remain unshaken. The moment left Netanyahu in awe, not out of fear, but out of reverence for what he had just experienced. It was as if eternity itself had brushed against him. He understood that God's plans often revealed themselves gradually, like pieces of a puzzle slowly falling into place. This moment was another piece of that puzzle, a reminder of something far greater unfolding. His responsibilities as a leader felt heavier yet more purposeful. He wasn't just running a country, he was carrying the weight of a destiny tied to prophecies that spanned thousands of years. In the days that followed, the phrase Wilson's Arch wouldn't leave his thoughts. It echoed in his mind, tugging at his understanding, almost demanding his attention. He didn't yet fully grasp its significance, but he felt certain it was tied to the unfolding events. It was more than just a historical landmark. It symbolized something deeper, a connection between Israel's ancient history and the prophecies coming to life in his time. Netanyahu found himself reflecting on his role. It wasn't enough to focus on political or military strategies. His calling was now intertwined with something far greater. He was a steward of prophecy, tasked with guiding his people not only through the challenges of the present, but toward a future that had been foretold. This realization gave him both a sense of urgency and a strange peace. Netanyahu immersed himself in uncovering the history of Wilson's Arch, realizing it was far more than an ancient structure. It was a bridge in Old Jerusalem, connecting the sacred Temple Mount to the upper city. But this wasn't just about stones or architecture, it symbolized something greater. It was a bridge between divine purpose and earthly reality, a tangible reminder of the intersection between heaven and the lives of God's people. As he delved deeper, a memory surfaced. Years ago, there had been a prophetic word about Wilson's Arch. It was said to hold a significant meaning that would be revealed at the right moment. Netanyahu now felt with absolute certainty that the moment had come. The arch wasn't merely a relic of the past. It was a sign from God, a signal that a pivotal time was unfolding. It carried a message not only for him, but for all those who were attuned to the times and could discern what was happening. With this realization, Netanyahu felt a pressing need to act. He gathered his closest advisors and spiritual leaders in a quiet chamber, sharing everything he had seen and understood. The vision, the words that had come to him, and the meaning of Wilson's Arch, it was all connected. The arch, he explained, wasn't just a historical marker. It symbolized a bridge between Israel's past and the divine promises still awaiting fulfillment. The room grew still as Netanyahu spoke with calm conviction. The events unfolding around them weren't random, they were part of a greater plan. The arch stood as a sign, a call to remember the faithfulness of God throughout history, and to trust in the promises yet to come. Netanyahu made it clear that the challenges they faced were monumental, but they were not without hope. A bridge of faith. Netanyahu believed that Israel itself was more than a nation. It was a bridge, a connection between heaven and earth. As he spoke to his advisors and spiritual leaders, he emphasized this vision, grounding their faith with the reassurance that, no matter the challenges, the promises of God stood firm. He urged them to see their place in history, not as passive observers, but as active participants in a divine plan. He called for unity and action, reminding them that the words and signs weren't just for him, but for all of Israel and believers worldwide. It was a collective calling to prepare, to pray, and to stand firm as people of faith. The room fell into a deep silence, the weight of his words settling heavily on those gathered. In that moment, Netanyahu wasn't just a leader, he had become a voice for something far greater, carrying a purpose that transcended politics or policy. In the weeks that followed, this sense of urgency shaped his actions and speeches. His addresses to the nation took on a new tone, one that felt deeply personal and filled with conviction. He spoke with an intensity that resonated with the people, reminding them of their shared history and the faith that had carried them through countless trials. He told them they were not here by accident, that every step of their journey as a nation had been guided by the same God who had been faithful to their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Netanyahu's words weren't just meant to inspire, they were a call to arms for the soul, urging people to trust that the same faithfulness would carry them through the challenges to come. Wilson's Arch began to take on a whole new significance for Netanyahu. It wasn't just another ancient structure in Jerusalem, it had become a symbol, a powerful metaphor. To him, the arch represented a bridge between Israel's rich history and its destined future. He often spoke about how the past and future were intertwined, how their history provided the strength to face what was ahead. This was more than just political talk for him, it was deeply spiritual. He leaned on the promises found in Scripture, finding comfort and resolve in the idea that God's plans for his people were full of hope and purpose. Those words resonated with him during difficult moments, anchoring him in the belief that every challenge faced by Israel had a greater meaning within a divine plan. One evening, during a moment of quiet prayer, Netanyahu experienced something extraordinary. A vision came to him, vivid and breathtaking. He saw Wilson's Arch glowing, its stones illuminated by a light that seemed to come from within. It was as if the arch itself was alive, infused with meaning far beyond its physical presence. It wasn't just a historical remnant, it was a beacon, radiating significance and a reminder of Israel's purpose. In that stillness, something shifted in his spirit. He felt a deep connection between the arch and the prayers of Israel's people. Just as the arch had supported structures in the past, those collective prayers seemed to hold up the nation, carrying it through storms yet to come. The symbolism was clear. Wilson's Arch wasn't just a marker of the past, but a reflection of faith and resilience, a sign that even in the darkest times, Israel would endure. Netanyahu was deeply moved by what he had experienced. The idea that the prayers of believers, whether spoken softly in solitude or cried out in desperation, held immense power, humbled him. He began to see these prayers as essential to Israel's survival, just as important as any defense system. Wilson's Arch, once a literal bridge to the Temple Mount, now symbolized those prayers, steadying Israel against both visible and invisible threats. Faith amidst crisis. In the days that followed, Netanyahu started noticing patterns. The prophetic warnings he'd heard began to align with the escalating violence sweeping through Israel. It was unsettling, but it also confirmed his belief that God's hand was at work, even in the midst of chaos. These events were not random. They carried a deeper meaning. When Netanyahu addressed the nation, his words reflected both the weight of the challenges they faced and a sense of unshakable hope. He spoke candidly about the hardships, acknowledging the struggles, but reassuring the people that they were not alone. His tone was steady, yet filled with genuine compassion. He emphasized that while these were trying times, they were far from the end. He reminded the people of God's promises to be with them in every trial. Drawing from Scripture, he highlighted that no matter how overwhelming the circumstances might seem, they would not be consumed. These words offered a sense of comfort and strength, a reminder that resilience was not just a matter of military might, but also of spiritual faith. Netanyahu also urged caution. He warned against assuming they had reached the final chapter of their story. It was tempting to view the unfolding events as the ultimate fulfillment of prophecy, but he reminded everyone that God's plans were not for them to define or rush. Instead, he called for patience and trust, a willingness to remain faithful and wait for God's perfect timing. October 7th started off like any other day, but ended up being one that Israel would never forget. The sharp wail of emergency sirens cut through the air, sending waves of unease across the nation. The news was grim: 300 missiles fired from Iran, all targeted at Israel. The scale of the assault was staggering, clearly meant to overwhelm even the Iron Dome, Israel's famously robust defense system. In the crisis room, Netanyahu stood still for a moment, letting the enormity of the situation sink in. This wasn't just another attack. It felt calculated, almost symbolic, like something bigger was unfolding. His thoughts wandered to Wilson's Arch, an ancient structure that had always carried a certain weight in his mind. Now it seemed to take on new meaning, a reminder of the prayers and faith that had sustained Israel through countless challenges. Later that day, Netanyahu gathered his closest advisors and spiritual leaders. The atmosphere was heavy, but his voice was steady as he spoke. He didn't just talk about strategy or defense systems, he spoke about something deeper. This crisis, he believed, wasn't just a test of Israel's military strength, but of its spiritual foundation. The importance of prayer, something he had always valued, now felt absolutely vital. He pointed to Wilson's Arch as more than a piece of history. To him, it symbolized the prayers of God's people, holding the nation together through thick and thin. Allies might waver and diplomatic efforts could fail, but the faith of the people, expressed through prayer, was unshakable. Netanyahu looked each person in the eye, making it clear that their strength had to come from something greater than missiles or politics. What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you in the next one.